Welcome to the Sound on Sound electronic music podcast channel. My name is William J. Stokes, and this is My Life in Modules, a podcast about modular synthesis, where each episode I invite a guest to select the synth modules that have meant the most to them and talk about why, before treating us to an exclusive performance using only that modest selection. It's a Buchla special this episode because I'm joined by American electronic musician and Buchla specialist, Kaitlyn Aurelia Smith. It makes perfect sense that Kaitlyn has collaborated closely with the great Suzanne Ciani, another Buchla luminary who was, of course, a guest on this very podcast a few episodes ago. But that's by no means the extent of her list of musical fans and collaborators, with remixes of her work, including Hot Chip's Joe Goddard and Fortet. And on the other side, she herself has reworked music by the likes of Max Richter and the Album Leaf. Kaitlyn's new album, Gush, explores themes of love, flirtation, peacock moments, and empathy for objects. And I'll testify it is a brilliant pop-adjacent record, bursting with her lush compositional style and some pretty stunning sound design as well. Kaitlyn, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. And I also love that you highlighted peacock moments, because I haven't heard anyone use that yet.
I will confess, yeah, it was a phrase that jumped out to me from the press release, but I really enjoy it. What does that mean to you, that phrase?
It's it's funny because I think I said it in passing in an interview, and so I love that stuck in the press release because it wasn't intended to stick in there. Mm-hmm. But it was more about those, the way that a peacock demonstrates like its performance when it's trying to introduce itself, mm-hmm. In its brilliance. And like the album is all about experiencing the genius of everything. So it's all about, having a relationship with something in that moment where it's showing you its brilliance. So that's what it was referring to.
It's not really a sort of a particularly common thing these days that people would allow themselves that level of display of whether it's skill or whether it's just sort of creative zeal. It feels kind of like, I don't know, that we like to hide the ball somehow, especially in electronic music. I find people like to kind of, be sort of hunched over and not really very exuberant. And then every now and again, when someone is kind of a bit more out there with showing showing what they can do, it feels almost jarring. Was that a bit of a challenge to kind of to be able to get to that place where you could sort of present it in that way?
Oh, well, it's interesting because the album isn't so much about me doing that. I actually feel like anywhere I am in the album is like the opposite, where I'm like more in the pulled in version.
Oh, okay. Several songs are making sense to me right now as you're talking. I'm realizing, I get it.
A lot of the album came into creation from me reading different design language literature. And a lot of design language has personification, and it is all about demonstrating through photos and through words, the excellence of something. And I just really fell in love with that process. The book I was reading was called A Timeless Way of Building. And that became a jumping point for me going further and further into different design language literature. So yeah, it's less about like the energy of look at me and more about the energy of like, look at this. And there's a blurb that I share with the album, which is in the press release. And one of the sentences in it is that the album is all about these look at this moments shared between two people, where it's like taking the time to look at every single thing in existence as a design piece of genius artwork, because at some point it was someone's masterpiece. And then it's about that energy that's created when two people take that time to do that together.
I love that. There's that, as you're talking, that T.S. Eliot line, the flowers had the look of flowers that are looked at. Sort of beholding the thing, the looking and the beholding of the thing as itself being such a rich exercise. And it's funny, isn't it? We often sort of forget to do that somehow with certain things. And when, as you say, in design language, I read a brilliant article not too long ago by I think his name was Raymond Lowry. And his insight into just how humans perceive stuff was just amazing. Even though this guy was like in marketing, it's something that artists so easily turn their noses up.
I mean, first of all, that's a beautiful line that you referenced. And I know I find that there's just like, at least for my own creativity, I found that there were so many parallels to think about when you're referencing just like marketing language and like how you were just saying, and like design language, and because it feels like it's like literature that's intended to be about the creative process. So I found it really inspiring to read.
Yeah. Oh, how interesting. Yeah. Well, I'll be hitting you up on email after this interview. You can send me the link to buy it. So as I mentioned there, Suzanne Ciani was a guest of mine on this podcast not too long ago. I mean, it feels almost pigeonholing of, two female Buchla using synthesists to say that collaboration that you guys did was always going to happen, but it feels like a match made in heaven, wouldn't you say?
We basically ran into each other because we were living in the same small town and met at a dinner party.
Right.
And then in the conversation of getting to know each other just as like two community members at a dinner party, we were both saying, "What do you do?" And each of us were like, "Oh, I'm a composer, I'm a musician, I make music with electronic instruments." And then of course, like as we went further down the questioning, and I said like, "What kind of electronic instruments?" And she said Buchla. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I know exactly who you are." Because there's not many.
I would have loved to see that penny drop moment.
And at the time, she wasn't playing Buchla instruments that much. I think she was just beginning to do a tour with, I'm trying to remember the artist she was touring with. So it was a really neat time to be around someone that was like falling in love with the Buchla again. It was a really special collaboration.
Do you feel like you learned anything in particular sort of that you could take away with you about using these instruments from her in that process?
Tool they're using, I'm learning from someone. And I love learning like how different everyone approaches the same thing. 'Cause for a while I used to think that, or I guess I'll phrase it differently. Like I had an immature part of myself that used to think with electronic instruments that if you're using the same instrument, it'll probably sound the same. And I feel like through that process and through different collaborations with other Buchla musicians, I learned that it really doesn't, like you could be using the exact same instrument with the exact same patch and it's going to sound different the same way, two pianists are going to sound different. And that was a really cool experience for me because I think it really, it just like instilled so much appreciation in me of like being able to be around other people in their craft and to have perspective into a whole nother universe that I would never have access to because it's the same way like any instrumentalist hangs out with another person who plays the same instrument and they're like, you have a whole partition of the music world that I'll never have access to, and it's so special to be next to that.
Absolutely. Mind expanding, really. And it really kind of, it's whenever I'm in a conversation with somebody sort of in that way, sometimes I forget to say anything because I really just want to try and absorb as much of their experience as I possibly can.
And I mean, like, I can't even really point to something specific just to answer your question because there's so many things that I appreciate about her and her process and like, just, I think she's just a really wonderful person and a very intelligent person. And it's almost like when you're around someone where you just appreciate them in their entirety, that it's not necessarily that you can like distill it to, I learned this from this person. It's like, you're just, you just appreciate them.
And how did you discover Buchla? Were you into Eurorack first, or
no?
Which order did it come in? In fact, I mean, I actually want to know, were you into Eurorack at all?
Well, I should say Buchla first, and then Eurorack. I've played with it here and there, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it's something that I'm into that much. I do appreciate Make Noise and 4MS and studio electronics. That's what it is. I just had to like relax my brain for a second.
Oh yeah.
I started with Buchla and then I actually went from studying sound engineering and thinking that I wanted to study acoustics and designing how sound interfaces in architecture. And then from there, I went into sound engineering for recording, like learning how to record, and wanted to work in analog studios. And then, and at the same time, I was studying classical guitar and orchestration and wanted to be a conductor. And then was introduced to Buchla synthesizers, and that was my doorway into synthesis, and hadn't really interacted with software synthesis or just like any concepts of synthesis. And then from Buchla, I started reaching out to different universities, and it was at a time where Eurorack was like just starting to become more popular, and so it was really easy to reach out to universities that had old electronic equipment and ask them if I could come in and play on any of their old analog gear. And so from there, I started just researching different vintage analog synths and finding out what university had what, and would go and do residencies, and then started making music and sharing it, and then got introduced to Eurorack. But I would still say I'm not that versed in it, because I feel like it's just one of those things where there's so much variety in it that I would need like time with every single module, because I mean, they're all so different.
And it's a language as well, of course. It's a different language. The way, even I'm sure we'll get into this, but the way that, even, the patch cable design is totally different. The way of, the control signals are different. And, I think there is a common misconception, particularly in modular, if not in electronic music, in my opinion, that if you're able to feel competent and skilled at one thing, then you are sort of by extension, apparently, competent and able with everything. And it's not necessarily true. There are some synthesizers that certain people just they're not drawn to those particular instruments for one reason or another, whether it's the workflow or the sound or something. And there are others that we are. And it's just like, say, I sometimes think of it as like in an orchestra, just because you can play one instrument in the string section, doesn't mean you can necessarily play all of them.
I know. And I mean, to be honest, I feel like I like to approach like all instruments like personalities, And I would never assume that like I can interact with every person. Like it would be a new experience every single time. And I feel like my confidence is in that I love to meet new people and I love to learn about someone. And that's like where it is with instruments too, where it's like I love to interact with a new instrument and get to know it. But I would never say like that I know how to play any, like, I mean, honestly, I would say I don't know how to play anything. So it's just like I have to get to know it.
Well, is that I heard a great phrase about composition recently. I think it was Jeff Tweedy said of Wilco, saying you can't really ever learn songwriting because once you've written a song, all you've learned is how to write that song, and then you have to learn how to write another song.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good quote. That really resonates.
Yeah, right. Because you really are kind of, starting again. Really, I actually that's another T.S. Eliot quote about it. I'm a big T.S. Eliot fan, in case you can tell. But there's like he's like there's I think it's East Coker in Four Quartets when I can't believe I'm quoting T.S. Eliot in this podcast. This is terrible, and I've done it twice now. But I think he calls everything a fresh raid on the inarticulate. Just again trying to say something that you can't say very well, and then you go on to the next thing. That's the mystery of it, I suppose. And in electronic music, there's that's something that I think has always drawn me to your music, is that I consider you as an artist to be blending languages, because you have a pop sensibility in your writing and you do sing, but then there is also the abstract. There's the sound design element. There is the sort of almost a very traditional, pure type of electronic composition where you're really working with discrete, circuits and simple waveforms and all that sort of thing. How do you find that those two coexist in your kind of creative ecology?
Well, I guess it started out of necessity or I guess maybe another way of thinking about it is like it started out of hunger of like needing to find different jobs with music. And so I was a sound designer for a while and like, and studio assistant and like engineer and each one of those, I did for like a good amount of time. And so they became very natural to me. And same with like transcribing and orchestrating. And so I think like, it's like each time I go to make music, I just naturally draw from what do I have access to in my skill set. And then my hope is that with every single creation, there's like an introduction of something new that I'm learning, since like learning is my inspiration button. It's like what will always initiate a new creation. So I think it's like a combination of this is just naturally the language that I have to draw from. It's kind of like if someone grew up in France and they're also Spanish and like, it's like those are their languages. So I think like sound design and orchestration just naturally comes out. And then there's always an element of something new that I'm interested in.
You're essentially kind of slaloming around just these different kind of touch points in your own creative world, really. I love that image, actually, because, when people start to get really good at a language, they suddenly go, oh, I just thought a sentence in French or in Spanish or something like that. It starts to make its way further inwards, where they don't think about it so much. They just think in that mode. And I guess, it occurs to me that when things become really sort of natural in our vocabularies musically, it feels so intuitive to then join them together that you sometimes, I would imagine, making Gush, I mean, I suppose it's maybe a good question to ask, were there moments that you listened back to some mixes or the masters and you went, oh, wow, I didn't even realize that I'd combine that and that?
That's interesting to think about. Maybe not in that exact like realization, but I'm curious if you're like this, like when I have had enough space from from making something, it almost feels like I have amnesia where I'm like, I don't know how that happened. Yeah. Yeah.
I know exactly
Even
what you mean.
when I'm playing it live, because I'm like practicing it now for the live set, I'm like, I can see how I'm making this, but I don't remember it like happening.
I don't know what it is. I think that's such a good way of putting it, because there is that amnesia where it's like something about the connections that were happening for me anyway. It's like the connections that were happening in my brain to make me create a patch in a certain way. It's like that thing with Jeff Tweedy. Like, I only learned how to do that one patch, and now I've forgotten it completely. And I have no idea. I've always struggled a bit with, like, you know, those kind of go-to patching methods. Like, oh, you know, okay, sure, there's something like you can make drums if you send an envelope to the pitch of a sine wave, make a kick drum or something. Okay, there's that. But when people get sort of a lot more prescriptive about, like, you know, this is how to create, you know, an evolving drone or something over time, and there's these specific kind of methods, I always struggle with that, because I find myself trying so hard to remember a specific technique that I am not very creative, and B, I forget it afterwards straight away anyway.
Right? I know. That's so interesting to think about, because, like, I simultaneously I'm trying to think about how to put this into words. It's like I simultaneously am suspicious when something says that this and this will always equal this, but also there's so many instances where that's the case, like with well, actually, okay, sorry. Now I'm like in real time thinking about this with you, because I was thinking about with like baking, you know, so much of it is like reliant on consistency. But then there's always the environmental things of, like, if you're at a different altitude or like temperatures or like the cookware that you're using, like there's still so many variables. And so I guess like to return to the beginning of that thought was like, I feel oftentimes like suspicious when something will like guarantee something, because it's like, I feel like so much of it is about responsiveness and like responding to situations. So I really liked what you were saying, because it feels like it like incorporates that responsiveness.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And that, I suppose what you just said there was at the root of my question before about those two sides of your musical output, because often songwriting, you know, it just feels like it activates a totally different part of the brain. It's not responsive it is responsive, but not in quite the same way. It's not quite, it is explorative, but not quite explorative in the same way. Patching, I suppose you could say it's like a method of composition by, I don't know, like almost more like abstract painting, you know, where you chuck something at the canvas and see what works and maybe take something away. And then it's just such a different type of approach. Yeah, we could theorize about creativity for the whole podcast.
I know, I love doing that. That's like one of my favorite conversations.
Obviously, you don't only use the 200E Buchla, but the modules we're going to be talking about today are from that system, and the modules you're going to be performing for us with later on. But from that system, I've given you a free pass here, and I hope you're appreciative, because normally I require my guests to only choose like 5 or 6 and only perform on those. But I've allowed you to keep the system as is and pick out a few different modules that we can discuss. So for any listeners that think that Kaitlyn's performance is too good to have been done on just these modules, you're absolutely right. The first module I'm really interested to ask you about is the 223 E. This is the multi-dimensional kinesthetic input and its accompanying module. This is for those unfamiliar with sort of Buchla design, this is the famous kind of eagle-shaped interface. You know, it's I was interested to ask about this as a kind of a segue to talking about how you interact with your system on a tactile level. You know, Don Buchla famously did not like chromatic keyboard designs as a means of interacting with his systems. But does that sort of resonate with you? Is that it looks like a kind of an esoteric design for people that aren't used to it, but You know, it's
yeah. I mean,
so many people swear by it.
I love it so much because I feel like it really releases any musical expectations that I have just like stuck in me, because I get to create, I mean, especially with the 200E that I have, like I get to create different presets for where it's tuned to whatever I want it to be. And so I love just like playing with changing up my mind's expectation. Yeah, I feel like it's a really, really, really crucial part of the creative process for me. It kind of reminds me of like when I used to play the guitar. When you start writing in an alternate tuning, it's like you feel like you just all of a sudden have a new instrument.
Do you find yourself reaching for the same kind of input each time, or like that? Do you, retuning the guitar?
Yeah,
do you find
I tend
yourself shaking it
to
up?
always. That's like kind of a. Not to say I have any creative rules, but if I did have one, that would be like, maybe the only one is like always start from a new place. And I have a notebook that I keep next to the 200E that has everything I've done before. And every time that I sit down, I like try, I mean, I don't change it every single time I sit down, but every time that I sit down to change it, write out a new page just so that I can always have that with me. And the memory card, I think it stores up to 30. I can't remember at this exact moment. So I feel like, it already like gives so many amazing starting places, just taking the time to program all 30 of those, which does take a long time.
But it's kind of part of it's part of the workflow, isn't it? That there's so much that you can do, but there is a kind of a beautiful way that I feel like this is kind of a quite characteristic of Buchla systems. It does make people slow down a little bit or really consider what it is they're actually doing.
Before the pandemic, I was gonna take the 200E out on tour, and I had spent, I think it was like 8 months programming it to be like perfect for the set, and like even practice timing myself to patch every single patch for every song so that I could do it like really fast. And then the pandemic happened and I never got to take it out. But I still have all those, all the presets. And I really enjoyed, I broke it up into sections of where for like, I think it was like a month, every single day, I sat down and just focused on programming environments that I would want to play with. And didn't even really play with them that much. I just was in this like programming mindset. And then once it felt like that got set, then I switched gears into like, okay, now I'm a musician and now I play it. And I really appreciated that. And I really like working with an instrument that, that invites that.
Let's move on to waveform generation, to use the Buchla E's. So the 261 and the 259 E, 261E, 259E, this is the complex waveform generator, and then the twisted waveform generator. I was interested to ask you about these sort of as a two-in-one, because it's obviously the genesis point of a patch, but these show, they demonstrate two very different workflows. Really, they come from sort of, it's clearly the same sort of approach ostensibly, but two very different sides of
I mean, I haven't really played a system that doesn't have both of them. They always tend to be together. And like as far as 200E systems go, because I feel like they're just so complementary.
Sort of like a Jekyll and Hyde relationship.
Yeah, because I feel like when they're interacting with each other, they create their own like sympathetic waveform folding situation, like FM thing. Like I think there was a lot of thoughtfulness put into how the frequencies, like the harmonic frequencies, interact with each other because you're in this like additive environment. So that I feel like there's a reason why almost every 200E system has both of them.
What kind of methods, I'm interested to know what kind of methods you sort of, off the top of your head, reach for in terms of your using oscillators?
Well, I don't really have specific methods, but I think the like orchestral background like always keeps my mind on what's happening sympathetically.
That's a really interesting way to kick off that answer. I'm keen to know more.
Well, I think it's like a combination of that and when I was studying how acoustics interact with architecture, I'm always paying attention to the frequencies that are psychosomatic. And I think like with an additive environment, there's just so much more at play there because they're constantly interacting and creating more partials. Where with subtractive, there's like a different thing that's happening, a different environment that's happening. So I think it's just really interesting it's like if you were to take those two oscillators and hook them up to an oscilloscope and watch them interact, it's like their interactions create their own like interesting asymmetry and symmetry.
And often the spaces between things are kind of where a lot of the complexity comes from. I think that was my biggest, just in modular in general, that was like one of my biggest breakthroughs in my understanding of it. When I was getting into it, was understanding that actually, a sine wave or something that is very simple. It's one thing to modulate this or make it move in that way, but actually when you start to get into kind of FM and audio rate modulation, that kind of thing, you start to create these interesting spaces between things, which is where the magic really seems to happen. Those residual resonances, those sympathetic frequencies, those, like it's really a classic example, but I was, it was such a revelation, Daniel Avery's drone logic, keeping the drone the same and modulating the resonance of the filter. That's just, so simple, but it was just like this ghostly melody that both doesn't exist and does exist. And, that I remember just finding that kind of, such an amazing realization that that's what he was doing. Let's move on to the 252E. This is the polyphonic rhythm generator. And this is sort of similar to the 22E kinesthetic input. This is an example of something that I think a lot of people who are not used to Buchla would take one look at and go, I have absolutely no idea how to use that. This is like a big sort of circular sequencer, essentially, but it works in concentric rings, right? I actually have no hands-on experience with this module myself, so I'm interested to ask, what is it?
It's similar to a Euclidean sequencer, kind of like... I don't know if you've ever played with like the Scorp, or it's using Euclidean geometry as the basis of the sequencer, which I really appreciate because I love polyrhythms. They really just feel the most natural to me. So it's basically a sequencer where you can have three rhythms happening that are in different time signatures, different tempos, different time signatures, different divisions. I'll say it like that because like it's not really meant to be thought of in a traditional music form. So it's easier to say from different timing sources, and different patterns. So it's like your timing source could be sending it and it's going through a pattern of 4, or another timing source is simultaneously going through a pattern of 7 and another one going through a pattern of 12. But then it's also interactive, so you can play it and change like what the timing sources are or what the divisions are. So I feel like it makes it really versatile for sound design and for just like really complex rhythm structures.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, that polyrhythm sort of side of it that's kind of goes back to what we were just talking about. That so much when magic happens in those unexpected overlap moments between two irregular rhythms or rhythms of different lengths. That definitely chimes with, I feel like in your music, dare I say it, I feel like there's a fair amount of minimalist rhythmic influence in there. In terms of some of your sequences, these overlapping polyrhythm things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the first like electronic influence that I had was music for 18 musicians, and that wasn't even an electronic piece. That was like, but it inspired me to learn about electronic music because it sounded to me like it was electronic, and it was the initial like mind-blowing moment of like, oh my gosh, I just want to make organic things sound electronic and electronic things sound organic. Yeah.
A lot of Modular sometimes seems to be sort of chasing that very dragon of where the overlap between, something that exists in the, so-called real world or in the physical world and sounds that exist in the electronic world, where making one sound like the other is almost kind of, that's the thrill.
Yeah.
Sometimes it seems to me. And actually, that's a good segue onto our next module, the 296E Spectral Processor, because this is of course something that can really imbue, it's a fairly simple source with some real sort of sonic complexity. It's a real-time performance filter, a compound equalizer, and it can be used, almost like a vocoder. This is kind of in many ways one of the sort of, I would maybe argue that one of the aspects of the 200E system whose influence is maybe felt, around the modular world more than any other.
I know, that's one of my favorite modules to interact with. Like, I love the tactile aspect of it. And I think just like frequencies and I think playing with the spectral realm of all sounds is like the most exciting aspect to me. And I love because I don't know if you've seen like, it'll follow your finger, like you can like actually play it. And I think that just makes it feel like a tactile like formant filter. Like when you're playing with one hand the envelope and then that with another hand.
Does it kind of double for you then as almost like an interface to the system? What normally in a patch, I'm interested to know where you sort of place it in a patch. Does it constitute sort of next to the oscillators as the root of something, or do you normally put it at the end where you have kind of almost this like end of chain sort of master control over the spectral content?
It's usually closer to, I mean, I guess it kind of depends on what sound I'm making, but I feel like I always approach sound like a mouth. And so I tend to put it like maybe in the middle of the chain, where I'm thinking about like, okay, what is the initial sound? What is like the resonating body of it? What is the shape of it? And then like, what is influencing the sound? Like, how's it interacting with, like, I put it more in the playability part of the chain where it's like, with the formant, like of a mouth, it's like that would be made by the shape that you're making and how you're making that shape. So I feel like I couple it with that.
Interesting. Yeah. I love that. Yeah, like a mouth. I mean, a mouth in some ways, I suppose, is kind of like a filter bank, in nature.
I love, like, I had this one teacher when I was studying classical music. I don't want to say like across the board, but most institutes say like you should take a lesson in every instrument of the orchestra so that you know how to write for it. And something that I learned during that process was that most instruments were created as an extension of the voice, like to do something the human voice couldn't do. And I feel like it's really fun to approach synthesis in that way too, except for that I like just always come back to, okay, what can this do that the voice can't do, and how does this connect to the voice?
And that's a great question to kind of keep at the heart of it. I feel like that, because you're returning to a fundamental, I suppose, a very human fundamental as well there. You're asking, how is this actually extend, I don't want to get too sort of, romanticizing it, but I feel like that does extend to how, the extension of the voice, like your creative voice, as well as the physical human voice. How much is this actually remaining authentic to my creative approach? And, something that I try and sort of remind people of, who I'm sort of, I suppose, educating in using some of this stuff is to know where the line is between them playing the instrument and the instrument sort of playing them in a way, or being carried along. It's okay to want to kind of, sometimes you feel you're going in a direction, you kind of agree with that and you allow it to happen. But sometimes, to take a minute and say, what, like you say there, like how much is this an extension of actually what I want to say, or what I want to I don't know, sing, if you know what I mean. It returns to like a 0 point that's very pure. I think that's
totally.
What
I feel like it's such an analogy for life, of like the constant balance of like what you can and can't control.
Absolutely, and keeping those things in balance. The orchestra is I feel like it's one of those things that will never die, because it's so infinitely, there's something about it that's so infinitely mysterious, because there are so many people involved. It's kind of like every instrument in every section is still bringing its own kind of little character. So that's the kind of the part which is maybe out of the control of the conductor or the composer, but then the parts that are in control, are sort of, they're really held quite tightly and in quite a regimented way. And it's really, I think that maybe, dare I say it, your background in that type of music is I think it's possibly, it sounds like it's created a really kind of fruitful approach to the whole craft of electronic music.
I know, I feel really grateful that it unfolded in the way it did. Because to be honest, like as I was on the journey, and like still in this moment, as I continue on the journey, it's like sometimes I don't know how that's going to play into that thing. I think we can all relate to that in some way or another. And so it's nice to have these mile markers to look back and see like, oh, wow, that really, like you said, like created like a fruitful pool of inspiration to reach into. And so I appreciate you highlighting that.
Yeah, totally. And I don't know, I feel like there's some overlap there. I couldn't tell you exactly what, but there's an overlap there with the last module that I wanted to ask you about, which is the 227E system interface. This is essentially the kind of, a 4-channel spatializer, I suppose, or a kind of a quad mixer, or how would you describe it?
I mean, that's a perfect way of describing it, of like a quad mixer, but you're able to send timing sources to it, so it'll have movement. It'll like feel like it's swirling all around you, and that can also create like a filter of its own as well, and it can also create like phasing. Like you can create analog effects with it because of the way that it can collapse and create a phaser, or it can create reverb, or it can, like, depending on how you're using it.
How important is quad and spatial to you?
Spatial is really important to me. Quad, I wouldn't say is it's not that it's not important to me. I don't want to say like anything's not important, but it's not like as important as spatial is to me. But I actually personally resonate the most with creating spatial environments in stereo, because I've done quite a few performances where it's quad and more, and I find that it feels a little bit exclusive because it depends on where you are in the audience to experience. Like it's like only the person in the middle is going to get the full thing, or the people in the middle. And so I really like I guess unless it's like a multiplied stereo, it's like a faux quad thing. But I really enjoy creating spatial environments in the stereo way, or multiplying the stereo image in a like 360 immersive thing. And that being said, I still love doing performances where it's many channels. And so I don't know how to say that in a way that doesn't feel binary, because I don't feel like one or the other.
It's interesting. I think that's something that a lot of the time the people I've spoken to about this subject kind of find themselves in a similar situation to the one you literally just described, where it's kind of, you know, it's not really about something being superior or inferior. It's not, and in some ways, even though it's a technological progression working in spatial, I don't think I've ever met anyone, even the people who are really expert in it, who would argue that like it makes them never want to listen to a stereo mix again or perform in stereo. There's not really, it's like mono to stereo. People draw that comparison between stereo and spatial. It's not the same in any way. What is it? I'm interested to ask in your words what it is that you. I hope you'll forgive this very sort of prosaic question, but why is it important that people feel immersed in the sound in a live performance?
It's actually something I've been thinking about a lot recently. Just though, it's almost like intimacy in sound. It's something I've been having a lot of conversations with people about, where it feels like over the last like 20 years, there's been more of an invitation into like sound getting closer and closer. And I think because people use it as like a force field, because our world is like, has so many other sounds that we're trying to not hear for a little bit, that I feel like people are wearing sound more like clothing than maybe they did.
I love that.
So I don't know. I think like it's almost like, for me, the immersiveness of sound is when it merges with your personality, where you're like, okay, I identify with this. Like I want to add it to my force field. Like I want it to be a part of my own expression. And that to me is like what connection is all about. For me is like when someone receives something and they're like, oh, this is now like a part of my expression and me. And I know that's how I take art in, is where like when I love something, it's like of course I like appreciate the person who made it 1000% and like acknowledge them. And it like becomes a part of my ethos as well.
Interesting. There's a really good paper that I read recently by Tim Hecker. It was his PhD paper about what he calls the era of megaphonics, kind of this period between the late 19th and early 20th centuries where everything just got louder and bigger. Foghorns got bigger, organs got bigger, you know, just everything got bigger and louder, and the people were trying to go for like the biggest orchestras ever assembled and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there's sort of an implicit impact on also our cultural kind of, in the West at least, understanding in that period of which sound or music we choose to listen to, and actually, so, you know, we're now sort of, I suppose you could say, kind of, well, like you were saying then, maybe out the other side of that into the point where we actually are using sound and music sometimes to actually as a shelter from, you know, this kind of unbearably noisy world that we now live in.
Yeah.
And intimacy, it's such a great way of putting it, actually, you know, because it's sort of, you know, spatial, I guess, the idea of immersion. I don't know, there's a bigness to that phrase that sort of has never quite chimed with me somehow. But when you put it in that way, actually, it creates an intimacy. That's something I feel like I can get on board with.
I know, and it's so interesting how, like, it's such a choice, like, as someone receiving it, like, it's actually not the choice of the person creating it or sharing it. It's the choice of the person receiving it to let something in and to be immersed by it. So there isn't really that much we can even do to create an immersive experience besides make it feel safe for someone to want to receive it. But that's, like, still not really in our control.
And with that wonderful aphorism there, Kaitlyn Aurelia Smith, thank you so much for joining me and for taking us through your life in modules. I can't wait to hear what you perform.
Oh, thank you. It's been an honor to speak with you.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to check out the show notes page for this episode, where you'll find further information along with web links and details of all our other episodes. And just before you go, let me point you to the soundonsound.com/podcasts webpage, where you can explore what's playing on our other channels as well. My name is William J. Stokes, and this has been a production for Sound on Sound magazine.